Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 211th episode of the Atlas Society Ask. My name is Lawrence Olivo. I'm the Senior Project Manager here at the Atlas Society, the leading nonprofit organization teaching young people about the ideas of Ayn Rand in fun and creative ways, like through animated videos and graphic novels. This week, our CEO, Jennifer Grossman, has the week off, but I'm excited to have with me today Atlas Society Senior Fellow Antonella Marty for a special interview with our guests Ricardo Avelar and Nelson Rauda. Before I begin to introduce our guest, I want to remind those of you watching on Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you can use the comment section down below and to type your questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Ricardo Avelar and Nelson Rauda are both El Salvadorian journalists who are going to join us today for a deep dive into the current economic and sort of political situation in El Salvador, thanks to its current president, Nayib Bukele. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. Antonella, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Lawrence. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I wanna start with Ricardo, and just wanted to ask you how did Bukele rise to power in El Salvador?
Um, so the way I see it, hi everyone, thank you for having me. It's good to see Nelson as well, great colleague. Um, the way I see it, El Salvador is one of many Latin American countries that reached a stage of democratization after authoritarian military governments in the late 80s to early 90s. And with democratization and institutionalization came a promise. And the promise was that people were going to lead prosperous, safe lives, and they were going to be happy. Like democracy brought the opportunity to stop fighting, to stop combating ideas with bullets and start combating ideas with ideas. Um, and what ended up happening is that we had 30 years, of governments, both from the right wing and the left wing in El Salvador, and they were corrupt and they did not know how to manage resources, ended up, fattening particular wallets when the country grew poorer and poorer. And then after 30 years of failed governments, there was someone who managed to capture the anger of a country, the anger of an entire country that was tired of corruption, tired of poor governance, tired of insecurity. We were the murder capital of the world in 2015. So whoever managed to capture that and turn it into relatable messages, especially in the social media age, was going to seize a lot of power, and that was Nayib Bukele. So Nayib Bukele started his career as a self-proclaimed center-left man who was a big fan of Hugo Chavez, according to tweets he has now deleted. He was fans of like different like Che Guevara and some other figures. But once he reached power, he has turned very authoritarian, and he has been embraced by an increasingly conservative fan base. And when I say conservative, I mean like wacky conspiracy theory fan base. And that is pretty much where we are now. We're dealing with a president who's seizing power, who's grabbing it all, who is at the same time leading a really corrupt administration, and that has effectively turned his administration into almost a quasi-religious one in the last few days and last few months. So that's where we are now. I'm sure we can delve into more details, but that has been sort of the story of El Salvador.
Mhm. And what can you say about this re-election?
One, that it's completely unconstitutional, that goes against all the rules that El Salvador tried to set itself for in the path not only to democratization but also for peace, and to further prevent new autocrats, new dictators. So that's there's a reason behind the provision of the re-election in El Salvador, and it is so that no matter how popular someone is, you're not going to let them grab power based on a very momentaneous popularity. And so Nayib Bukele may be legitimized by some successes in security, but he is going against all of the rules that we set to prevent further more dictatorships in the future. And I think it's a bet that is dangerous. And I think that we are soon going to see that El Salvador may follow the path of other countries that did the same thing and encounter the same results, be it left or right.
And how have Bukele's policies impacted the economy and maybe social conditions in El Salvador? Because the economy is not doing that well. Am I right, Nelson? Would you like to tell us something about it, or Ricardo? What are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, there are more poor people in El Salvador now than there were when Bukele started being president in 2019. So, if that's one of the measurements that we're going to go by, no, the economy is not doing well, and you can see that in every poll that every public opinion poll that is published nowadays. Everybody says that the economy is the major concern. It used to be the security, and you have to accept and you have to recognize, it's a better verb, that Bukele has had success in changing the security condition. The homicide levels have dropped, and people they say that they feel more secure in the streets. This has been at a huge cost of human rights, a huge cost of liberties, of civil liberties in El Salvador right now, under the state of exemption that is so applauded, especially around the CPAC, around the conservative circles in the right wing, in the English speaking world. You would you would be like astonished to know how little defense we have as Salvadorans when we are in court. We don't have the right to an attorney. We don't have the right. The Constitution says that you have to be presented 72 hours after you're arrested to a tribunal, to a courthouse. We don't have that right anymore. The state can go through your phone or through your mail or through your personal information without a warrant under the state of exemption. These are all things that would make people, people that say that they appreciate and maybe appreciate liberty so much, civil liberties. This has been the cost of the security change in El Salvador, and to that society that I belong to, this has been a fair price to pay, because people have never known the security, have never known, have never really lived peacefully in their homes. But I do think it brings up a question whether if the so-called Bukele model is someone that you would desire, if you would be willing to pay the price that we have paid and that we are paying for to have those kind of results in security, while at the same time not having any kind of results in the economy. $1 in $4 that circulates in our economy comes from remittances. Bitcoin has not made a dent on any of that. So yeah, the economy is obviously Bukele's biggest challenge right now.
Ricardo, what are your thoughts on this? You want to mention something?
Yeah, I think Bukele says that his first term was focused around security, and I agree with Nelson. There are it's an objective truth that El Salvador is a safer country now, but it is safe from the threat of gangs. But we are increasingly aware that it is not safe from the threat of the state. And I know that some of the people who may be watching and are like defenders of liberty and loving liberty understand that the threat of the state can sometimes be as dangerous as a threat from any criminal group. So that's one thing to consider. No, the economy is not something that they have really taken seriously. I think his biggest idea so far was Bitcoin, and I see that there's a question here that if Bitcoin doesn't go against authoritarian control, well, it is when it's voluntary. But in El Salvador, we were forced, taxpayers, we were forced to finance and fund this Bitcoin plan, which is which does not resemble the whole idea of Bitcoin, which was voluntary. You assume the risk if you want to assume the risk. And what ended up happening is that we ended up throwing hundreds of millions of dollars. And mind you, this is a really poor country that spent a lot of money in Bitcoin, and the only thing it has achieved is getting the president new friends. That is it. These are people who come from the States or other countries, and they are shown the country around like VIP tourists using public resources, including helicopters paid by for the government, paid by the government. But it hasn't done anything for people, in like our high streets and in our little towns and everything. And now the president says that his second term is dedicated to address the lack of economic growth. And he did say in his inauguration address that the three things they have to do to achieve, or we have to do as a country to achieve growth, are: one, let the government work without the people complaining; two, stop complaining, not say anything, believe in it, including the fact that we're going to have to drink bitter medicine, as he called it; and three, believe in God, because this will require a miracle. When you hear those words, you understand that you're not in front of a statesman with clear and sound policy ideas. You may be in front of a cult leader. And that is, I think, what's going on in El Salvador right now. There's no plan. There's no big ideas. There are no experts. The economy requires technical knowledge. It requires people who know what they're talking about. And what's going on in El Salvador is that the president is surrounding himself by yes men. And lately, he brought an expert. He brought a new advisor. And this new advisor that the president is introducing the country as, a leading AI expert, his biggest achievement, at least what we could find, is that he wrote a book on how to improve your business by using Pokemon Go. So this is the El Salvador, the Bukele model that people are talking about. It's more like a cult.
So we are definitely concerned about the rule of law, right?
Yeah. Well, if it existed.
Nelson,
Yeah.
would you like to mention something?
I think there's two problems. Rule of law is something that exists and applies for people like us, people like Ricardo and me in El Salvador, who have had the opportunity to have a college education, which is only 11% of the country. I don't know what the percentage of the country speaks English, and I don't know. A lot of them don't get these opportunities to talk in platforms like this. I believe that makes it a responsibility for us to talk in the name of people that in 80% of the country earns less than $400 a month. So when you talk about these big words, rule of law, democracy, separation of powers, checks and balances, these are only things that we were concerned about because we could afford to be concerned about them, because we weren't dealing with basic, the Maslow pyramid, basic needs of food and shelter, essentially. And this is what, and security in this, for if you were a Salvadoran living under the fist of gangs, and you had like a teenage outside of your house controlling who went in and out of the community that you live in, you were not thinking of rule of law. When that existential danger ceased, or at least gave people some breathing room, they were, and I think we as a country are so thankful that we're not just breathing or searching for oxygen, that you don't really care about about all the rest of things. What has happened is that in the process of that, the men who did the change in security also controlled and managed to get a hold of all the state institutions. And you can get, and you can discuss if that was the only way to do it. But the fact of the matter is that now, if you are in any chance in El Salvador against someone from the state, a policeman, a soldier, a judge, if you get fired from your government job, if you have a house and the government's going to build a road through the land that this house sits in, if you anything and that you go against the government, you don't have anything that defends you. The Minister of Jobs or the Minister of Labor will not be on your favor in the case against the government, because it's controlled by the same men. there are no independent judges, and we are dealing with the consequences of that right now. We are the Legislative Assembly does not debate issues. The Bitcoin law was approved in 85 minutes, which is less than a soccer match. This is the state of things that we are right now. So yeah, I don't think we can talk about a rule of law anymore in El Salvador, and this is concerning for the people who understand why that is important. Unfortunately, a lot of our society lives lives that don't make them realize how important it is, and by the time they go and find out, there's nothing else to do.
And what about the future of the country? Like, do you see there's a chance of like to see him leave power, or like what's going to happen next? How's going to be the next administration if there is a like a different president or someone?
I'm
I mean,
going.
is he willing to leave power in El Salvador, or
I'm gonna get in trouble here, but answer would be something like, if there are fair elections, like people
exactly?
might be used to in the states. I don't think so. I don't think that there's a way that we can get past a Bukele administration where he will willingly surrender power, um, because if that would have happened, it would have happened by now. The law prohibited that he continued term. He acknowledged this in several interviews before 2021. And then when he replaced the Constitutional Court and he replaced the judges, and they were the ones that decided that Bukele could do what the Constitution has said for 200 years that he couldn't do, I don't know if there's a way back from that. The law already prohibits this. Why would he, now that he
Yeah.
has all the power, go back to a place where he go base the law? I don't think there are any institutions or individuals left in El Salvador that have the power to make Bukele obey the laws. And so I don't see it. The history tells us in this country we haven't had a single person stay in power illegally since like Bukele since 1935. The last one was Maximiliano Hernandez Martinez. He started his presidency in 1932. He stayed until 1944, and he didn't surrender power. He was ousted by a popular strike that went throughout the whole country. So if history says something, these people that stay in power don't relinquish it that easily.
Yeah, and I do want to focus on the importance of the rule of law and the importance of democracy, because this makes me think about Venezuela. They already have 27 constitutions, if I'm not wrong. So it's like step by step. It's something like, it's like a guide. They do that every single time. We got used to this in Latin America. So is there a way we can compare this manipulation of the constitution, or the branches of the state? What can you tell me about this? Ricardo, maybe if you want to say something about it.
Yes, I just wanted to comment quickly on the rule of law because you mentioned it earlier. And this is something maybe Nelson can tell us more about it because it's his outlet that published this, El Faro. But they found police documents, police statements when they arrested people under the state of exception right now. And in many cases, they arrested people because they seemed nervous. Now, I don't know how many of you watching are like me and you get nervous and you're walking in the street or you're anxious or whatever. We would all be in prison under the things we saw there. And I just wanted to comment on that, just for you to think about how absurd it is that you can end up in prison, not being able to see a judge for 15 days, and then maybe in prison for up to 2 years without a sentence, without being sentenced, just because you seemed nervous to a police officer. So I just wanted to say that. Now, comparing to Venezuela, it's curious that, in this roller coaster that Bukele has meant for El Salvador, he is a kind of man who used to wish Hugo Chavez happy birthday on Twitter. Then, when he was about to be inaugurated in 2019, when he first won the presidency, his legitimate one, in 2019, he said a couple of days before his inauguration that he was uninviting um, the leaders of Nicaragua, Honduras, and Venezuela. And the reason he said that is that they were against democracy. And he said they like in different, paraphrasing him, he said that they did not care about like setting their countries on fire. They wanted to stay in power and conduct a power grab. So this was, for a continent. I mean, we knew what kind of man he was before he got to the presidency, but to some extent, it was like, all right, interesting that he's when he gets to the presidency, he's trying to distance himself from the kind of people who would bend the rules, the kind of people who would only adhere to the Constitution when the Constitution says what they want to do, and if not, they can create their new Constitution. So it was it seemed like he was trying to distance himself, and Nelson was talking about like how Bukele said and acknowledged he couldn't be reelected. He had a quote unquote interview, and I say quote unquote because he doesn't do interviews with local journalists. He only speaks to foreign, not even foreign media. He does sometimes, but he mostly speaks with like influencers, YouTubers, or Bitcoiners. He told a Mexican influencer that he could be, this is before he had complete control of the state. He told this influencer that he could be reelected 80 times, but not continuously. So he knows, he said it himself. His vice president said it too. But then in the middle of his term, they control the constitutional court. They remove the justices legitimately named, legitimately said in the court. They impose 5 puppets in a suit. That's effectively what they are, 5 puppets. And then months later, to no one's surprise, they say, well, he can be reelected now, doing a very audacious interpretation of a constitutional article that clearly says they cannot, that no one can be reelected. So anyway, they were sanctioned by the U.S. They were pariahs for a little bit in the in the lawyer community in El Salvador, but ended up being embraced by the government, and they were like, all right, cool, now he can be reelected. A year after that controversial ruling, Bukele, in his address on Independence Day, said that after careful consideration and discussion with his family, he accepted. It's like a gift for him. He's saying like, or like some sort of sacrifice. He's like, yes, I will do this. I talked to my family, and they allowed me to keep being your president. And this is no sacrifice. This was his plan all along. But anyway, he won re-election. Now, in the middle of his first term, they also started talking about a new constitution. So this is in some countries they have pretty much enacted new constitutions. In El Salvador, they suggested doing it through the way of constitutional reforms. So instead of drafting a new one, they were going to change some articles from the constitution that we already have, and that was supposed to, or it was designed to, prevent abuses of power. What ended up happening is that they presented a draft project which amended like 240 of our 270 some articles, which is effectively a new constitution. And it's a constitution that cuts limits on power. So it's a constitution allowing him to do more and more and more. So would you compare, this idea of constitution that every president wants their own constitution? If you think about it, and this will resound with everyone who's from Latin America or is familiar with our history, this does not sound like governments. This does sound like what we call like haciendas, like big farms. Our presidents, when they want to reenact or enact their own constitutions, they do not see themselves as elected officials for a certain period under a set of rules. They see themselves as the owners of this land. And I think that is how Bukele sees himself in El Salvador. So he effectively thinks that he can create his own rules, and then under that, no one is safe. Going back to the rule of law, the only rule of law in El Salvador, the one that matters, is that if Bukele likes you, you're safe. If Bukele doesn't like you, it's a matter of time until something can happen to you.
Lawrence, are there any questions from the audience that you would like to mention?
Sure. We've got a number of questions coming in from YouTube in particular. The first one we have here comes in, let's see, from Alan Turner, who asks, "How much freedom of the press is there in El Salvador? Has it gotten worse?" I'm assuming he means under Bukele.
I have I have a direct answer to that, because there are people who are dedicated. It's easy for me as a journalist, and I think you already can tell I don't like Bukele's policies that much, to say that it has gotten worse. But the Reporters Without Borders, they make a ranking every year, ranking every country in the world from for the freedom of the press, and they have several measures. So in 2013, El Salvador was in position number 38 of 180, and this year we are in position 133rd, 133. So we have dropped 97 positions in 9 years. So that's what has happened. Why, you might ask? Well, a bunch of us got, including Ricardo and me, got hacked with Pegasus. In between 2020 and 2021, Pegasus is this Israeli weapon that allows you to basically clone everybody's phone. They were in my phone for 62 days. Basically, the whole newsroom of El Faro was infected. Newsrooms, journalists from other newsrooms like Ricardo and like others were affected. Civil society leaders, opposition politicians. That happened. There have been an enormous number or increase in the attacks against journalists via the harassment, via judicial persecution, including making journalists and newspapers to publish rectifications done by judges in this judicial system that we have been talking about. There have been journalists who have left the country, who have exiled themselves. There's increasing self-censorship. There, you cannot be critical about Bukele basically in mainstream television or in the radios. So yeah, the freedom of the press has gotten a turn for the worse over the last 5 years.
Another question that comes in also from YouTube. This one comes from Lock, Stock, and Barrel, who asks, "What caused Bukele to come to power? Why did people choose him over, I'm assuming, any other presidential candidate at the time?"
If I may, I think I touched a little bit when we first started, but it's frustration. You know, in a poor society, when governments dedicated themselves to plundering, and they pretty much like endanger the future of countless generations by just fattening their wallets and neglecting public needs. This meant that, and it was very obvious that they were protecting themselves and they were corrupt. And this is 20 years of the right that led to 10 years of the left, and the left had a big promise, and they said we're going to fix things, they're going to turn to like the social issues, and they didn't, and they became as corrupt or more corrupt than their right-wing counterparts. Then it created a sense of frustration, a sense of despair, a sense of no one is actually looking out for El Salvador. And this is when someone like Bukele became popular, and his motives were very simple. May they return what they stole. That was the first thing. Devuelvan lo robado in Spanish. Like that was in people's minds. This is what he was promising, that all those who took a single penny of public funds, they were going to return it. And what has happened is that 5 years later, there have been a few minor cases. They have persecuted people from the past, but then people from his administration, people with credible reports of corruption, with plenty of evidence, they have not been persecuted. They have been embraced. They have been protected. One of the things that Bukele promised, and this was his star promise when he was in his first campaign, was that he was going to bring an international anti-corruption commission, kind of like they had in Guatemala, that managed to bring down a government because of corruption. So Bukele promised the same thing. And in his first address as president, people interrupted him to start chanting CCS, which is the name of that commission. And Bukele delivered on that promise. He brought it 3 months after he got inaugurated. Curiously enough, on that day, and linking this with a previous question, the day he presented the commission, the Anti-Corruption Commission, he prevented two or three media outlets, including Nelson's and including the one I work for now, from getting to the press conference. So he said, I am launching this anti-corruption campaign, an anti-corruption commission, but I'm not going to let these 2 or 3 media outlets into the conference. So that's the message, At the time, there were a few newspapers that covered this and denounced, that the president was blocking the media from his launch. And those outlets were punished by removing, contracts in El Salvador newspapers, publish public service announcements from the government, and it's a way of finding revenue, and the government removed it from all of them, from them, effectively making it a sort of game of punishment if you don't publish what the government likes. This commission existed for a little less than a year and a half, and it got killed by the government when this anti-corruption commission found corruption cases within his government. So that is people elected him because they thought he was going to be able to solve insecurity and solve corruption. He has dealt with insecurity, as Nelson said, but corruption has been more of a means to seize power, to persecute political opponents, and to solidify his control and his embracing of corrupt officers in his administration.
This question, also from YouTube, goes a little bit broader than the scope today, but I will bring it up just for the three of you to discuss potentially. Talking about, you mentioned the rule of law. This question comes from Kingfisher21 asking, who has the weakest judicial branch? El Salvador, Argentina, Brazil? And I could say you could probably expand that to others if you think there are ones that are worse.
I don't have an extensive knowledge of Argentina or Brazil judicial branch. I would say that in El Salvador, we don't have any war criminal convicted for their crimes through the dictatorship. You cannot say the same about Argentina. I think there's a temptation to always think the worst of 4 countries and the worst of 4 situations. And obviously, I'm not exempt from that temptation, but I think that there are objective reasons that you could say that Argentina and Brazil have stronger institutions than El Salvador has. El Salvador only was a democracy from 1992 to 2021 or 24, if you want to establish it now. I would say that we're not a democracy anymore. Whilst, Argentina, Milei is this character that is obviously trying to wreak havoc in the status quo, but I don't think that he has managed, or I don't know if he has the intention, but he has not managed yet to get a hold of the whole judicial branch. I think if that was the case, he would be progressing much faster to his agenda. And in the case of Brazil, I think they were very challenged, very, very challenged in the sense of the whole Bolsonaro presidency, but they managed to withhold the storm. So if it was a question between those 3 countries, I would say I would put my money on El Salvador as having the weakest judicial branch.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that Bukele has taken severe and direct steps against judicial independence. He removed constitutional justices from the constitutional court. He replaced them with puppets in suits. He also, a month or 2 later, he got his people in Congress to approve this decree, effectively removing a third of the country's justices and judges and replacing them with younger, pretty justices or judges that were complacent and very indulgent with his agenda. And there was a threat to all the judges in the country that if they ruled against the interests of the ruling elite or the government, they would be either removed or replaced. And there were a few judges that remained independent. And after rulings that were controversial for the government or for the government's interests, they were sent to lower tribunals that don't, like, in like really small towns and like far corners of El Salvador. So I don't think that has happened. They also removed the attorney general. They imposed a new attorney general who had worked close to Bukele before. So they, like, I feel like there may be intentions in Brazil. There may be intentions, or there were more so in the Bolsonaro administration. There may be intentions with Milei, but in El Salvador there are no longer intentions. There have been objective steps to undermine judicial independence, and I think judicial independence in El Salvador is a thing of the past now.
Okay, another question. This one comes from Ricari Thomas asking, is there a housing crisis in El Salvador? If there is, what can be done to solve it? And I guess you've already mentioned a bit about the sort of the economic situation. This is perhaps a bit more in the weeds, but maybe you could explain that a bit more. What's going on there?
There is a housing crisis in El Salvador. The in the sense that there is a crisis in housing in the whole world, that you cannot. There's very few people that can go by this financial advice that you shouldn't be paying more than 30% of your income in renting a place or in the mortgage of your house. There's very few people that can do that. I cannot do that. And we have seen this in several ways, in the gentrification in certain areas, especially around the shoreline, which is a phenomenon that it's ongoing, partly fueled by the Bitcoin appeal. Bitcoin has been an economical failure by the government, but a publicitary and advertising success in portraying El Salvador as this land of opportunities and liberties, which also boasts the highest rate of incarceration in the world. But there has been an appeal for people to come to places like El Sonte, El Tunco, La Union, these areas called like Surf City or labeled as Surf City, and this has driven up the cost of real estate in the area. Also in San Salvador, you are getting places with that would fit in markets like in price terms in markets like Houston. While we have national income, 80% of the people earns $400 or less. So there is a crisis in houses. What can be done to solve it? I think, I don't know if that's going to be popular in this particular audience, but I think regulations. You have to regulate, and you have several states in Europe that are regulating, like Barcelona, New York, I think, has done it, regulating, for instance, these Airbnbs, the rentals, because that is happening. You're building houses and apartments for people that don't live here, and that drives up the expense. Also, the investment that the government does in real and in social living, in social buildings, in buildings that are addressed to people with low income. We have not seen a huge amount of that in the country. So I think that is a couple of things that can be done, but it is a crisis. It's not something that is making any headlines, and it's not between the country's top proprietors.
What do you think about that, Ricardo? Do you think regulations would work, or should we go for free market instead?
I believe that free markets can only exist. I believe there are only certain countries and certain conditions and certain times and places in which free markets could be an acceptable subject to discuss. As in El Salvador, the free markets discussion is beyond any possible scenario, because we do not have a rule of law, because we effectively have a ruling elite that has different rules as everyone else in the country, and because they treat their friends with high privileges. So I believe that we are beyond the discussion of free markets. In the current stage in El Salvador, what we see is that there are high gentrification efforts, and they do not respond to the nature of the free market. They respond to privileges. They respond to people coming with particular benefits that that not everyone in the society you know gets, and these are benefits and privileges paid for by with public funds, including the whole Bitcoin scheme that has allowed a lot of people to come, not to bring investments as the government boasts, but to buy a cheap house, set foot there, and then there's nothing that prevents the migration or displacement of all the communities of locals who have found themselves having to leave their communities wherever they try to establish their livelihoods because they can no longer afford it. So I believe that in a country like El Salvador, under the current state of affairs, free markets are no longer a real subject, because we are talking about an elite with their own rules. So I'm going to have to agree with Nelson. I think this is these disparities have been created by distortions created by law and by the state, and I think they can only be addressed by regulations set for by the state. If not, I think it's going to be an illusion to think that there will be a clarity of rules, clear path to investments, and a free market that will address our current problems.
Another question, this one also comes from YouTube, goes back to still on this economic focus. The question coming from Guardian Gamer was for you, Nelson, but everyone else can chip in as well. But it's asking, here we go. Do you think El Salvador might create a central bank digital currency? Do you think they'll move away from Bitcoin to try to have more control over the economic situation?
I think you have to understand that Bitcoin has been principally a advertising gimmick for the Bukele government. People in El Salvador don't use Bitcoin in their daily lives. And I have zero fears of saying this. Come to El Salvador and do not bring any cash and do not bring any credit card. Just bring your Bitcoin wallet and try to live in this country for 5 days just paying in Bitcoin. Because you will find that Bitcoin is like a tourist thing that people, you can go to El Sonte and pay some things there, but you will need it because you will need other means of payment, because 80% of the country doesn't use it. I think that's 80% of the country didn't use it once throughout 2022, and it's less and less and less. And when you ask vendors that accept Bitcoin and you ask them, hey, who buys this? They always say, oh, it's the gringos, it's the foreigners, the tourists. So when you say El Salvador adopted Bitcoin, I always put in the question mark, did it really? Because people are not using it. With regards to CBDCs, Bukele already, there was already a plan before Bukele. I'm going to put you a link so you can share it to all of the audience. Back in 2021, we published the original idea behind the Bitcoin adoption was to launch a Salvadoran digital currency. In that moment, they disregarded that plan for the moment. I don't think there has been too much movement with regards to CBDCs now, especially after the crypto burnout summer of 2022. Things started to go down, to cool off a little bit. You haven't seen, if you pay attention to El Salvador Bitcoin thing, you haven't heard about the volcano bonds in a while. There was this offer to invest in a new hotel, in a new Hilton hotel, I think it was, and you would buy this through the platform that's going to sell the Bitcoin bonds. That offer didn't collect what it was supposed to do. So I don't think, and obviously this is not a popular policy for Bukele in El Salvador. He hasn't talked about Bitcoin in Spanish in almost 2 years. He only tweets about this in English. So Bitcoin is a policy to attract other people, to attract people that are non-Salvadorans, that are mainly English speaking, and it serves for him as a advertising campaign. But I don't think he in the economy side. He's got bigger fish to fry right now. He's desperately trying to get to secure an agreement with the IMF, which would not be super popular with the Bitcoin crowd that says, "Oh, fuck the IMF" or whatever. But that's where the chips are playing right now. That's where the things stand. So I don't think that I don't expect to see a wide movement towards CBDCs in the near future. It doesn't make sense at this time for him.
I see a very interesting question there. It says, "Does Bukele style himself as a populist?" Ricardo, how can we identify a populist? I mean, we're from Latin America, so we know about it. But what can you say about this? How can we identify a populist leader or messiah?
Okay, so first of all, I want to start by sharing an anecdote with you all. When I was in 2012, from 2012 to 2015, I ran this like small NGO in El Salvador, and we used to talk about like rule of law and democracy and human rights and so on. And there were in 2013 we decided to draft this like sort of commitment that we were sending out to politicians around the country, and it was just a big statement saying, I will commit to being transparent, not abusing public resources, blah, blah, blah. And there was one item that says, I will refrain from resorting to populist measures, blah, blah, blah. So we sent it out to different politicians around the country. Some signed it, some didn't. And Bukele replied to us via Twitter. And this is when he was mayor of a small town. He was not as popular as he is now. I think he had like 1,000 Twitter followers now, not the millions he has. And he replied to us like, ha 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 ha, as long as you delete, as long as you remove the populist clause, I will sign it. So he's never been afraid of using this. Then I think in a public forum, he once said, a lot of people complain about populists, but I'm telling you that if a populist means that you're gonna draft, regulations and rule for the country and along with the country and the people, then I will be a populist. So he's a kind of politician who embraces all of the attacks that he gets. Whenever he gets a label, he will embrace it. He will set it as his Twitter bio. So it's no surprise that throughout the years he's been president, he has, for example, described himself in his Twitter bio as the coolest dictator in the world, as a philosopher king, back to the question. I think he's not afraid to be labeled as a populist, and I think he responds very well to the academic description of a populist, which is a person that disregards institutions, that makes everything revolve around themselves, that presents society in terms of us and them, good, including people who support me and applaud me, bad, who's people who may have questions, not only the opposition, but journalists like Nelson, like myself, people who have questions, uh, citizens who may want to know when there's going to be a housing project, when there's going to be an initiative to alleviate poverty. All of those people will be considered enemies, evil, bad, by the Bukele administration, and if they happen to be in the wrong side of town at the wrong time, they might even be arrested. So if you base yourself, if you base your definition of populist by that, by someone who's personalistic, by someone who makes all of the institutions revolve around their own, their own mood, whatever they want that day, then he is a populist. He disregards the rules. He disregards the constitution. He disregards institutions. He makes institutions revolve around himself. So yeah, I think he is a populist. He's not a populist in the sense that he would want to be. He's not a populist in a sense of being a ruler, of the people, but also with the people and for the people. He's a populist in the sense of disregarding rules, and not a populist in the sense of he doesn't govern for the people. He governs for himself, his family, his group of friends, and this image, this fantasy that he has created around El Salvador as the land of liberty.
If I take you back to like the concept we were talking about, like the economy, we can say that there's no economic freedom in El Salvador, right? Are there any like rankings or something that you can mention? Like, there's no economic freedom. Am I right?
I don't know. Not so everyone. I'm just gonna say that there's no economic freedom without rule of law, and there's no rule of law in El Salvador. So as long as 80% of the people or 60% of people live in fear, which is like according to a recent poll, there can there it's just an illusion to talk about economic freedom. I don't know what Nelson thinks.
How do you define economic freedom?
I mean, free markets, being able to, buy the things you want. Uh, what would you say about that? Like, can we say that there are free markets or
Hmm.
not at all?
I
I mean, is it an
it,
open economy? Can you
it,
trade with other countries?
it is an open economy in that sense. I just keep going back to the for me, this is the most corporate government that we've had in El Salvador since Paco Flores, which was the 90s, the whole neoliberalization era. Everything in the country is getting privatized in a sense. The government is building, it has its own newspaper, its own construction company, its own news channel, its own it's and the contracts usually go because we don't have any information about this. Everything is a secret. Everything is a secret for 7 years, so we don't have a lot of information about where the contracts go, where the money is flowing. I don't think that you can talk about freedom in that sense. If you have free markets, I would say sure, until you get in the way of the president. And if you get in the way of the president, you won't have any sort of way to to sort it out. There will be no checks and balances. In the sense that you can buy everything that you want. No, the basic the groceries that you need in a month are more than half the average income, and more than half the minimum wage. So I wouldn't portray us as a free country in that economic sense. I would portray us as a safer country than 5 years ago. uh, but I don't think it's funny because I've been attending, and I've been covering Bitcoin since the implementation. uh, and they talked to me about the origins of Bitcoin. I read the Fountainhead to try to understand the the zeitgeist of these people. And what I understand now, and what I encounter, is that it's how can you defend freedom, economical freedom, through Bitcoin, if that's the only freedom you have left? If you don't have freedom of association, of expression, of press, of electing officials in the future, uh, and you want to say that we have economic freedom just because Bitcoin is a quote unquote legal tender, it would be hard to characterize the country as that.
Yeah.
If I
Now that we talk about Bitcoin, Lawrence, maybe you want to mention something about the interviews we did with Michael Saylor on Bitcoin, and where can we find the videos? Can you mention that?
Yes. So those of you who are watching us on YouTube and or Facebook, after this video, of course, you can be free, either check the comment section here momentarily, or you can check on the channel page afterwards. We had released last week a very excellent interview with Antonella Marty, interviewing Michael Saylor, part one of a series of masterclass interviews talking about what fuels civilization, talking about Bitcoin, and talking about these ideas. So we'll put a link in the chat, and again, keep watching as more videos come up each week.
Thank you. I think we're running out of time, but are there any
can I quickly add
questions?
something? can I quickly add something to what Nelson was saying? Because I believe that for the people watching, it is really important to understand that a distinction between the ideas of liberty and what is going on in El Salvador. I love the way that Nelson says it. You cannot talk about a free country if Bitcoin is the only free thing. And I would argue that when we first heard about Bitcoin back in late uh 2000, like late 2000, early teens, we learned that it was an idealistic way, like decentralized currency that wasn't forced, that was completely voluntary. That is not the case in El Salvador. We were forced. No one asked us if we wanted to do this. The announcement was first made in a conference in Miami in English. So this was something that Salvadorans did not have a choice uh, to accept or not accept. That is on the one hand. On the second hand, I want to point out a few examples. Economic freedom, I think, requires rule of law. It requires certainty of the rules and knowing that your investments. And you say, is it can you invest in El Salvador? Yes, you can invest in El Salvador. They have actually reformed a few rules and regulations that will cut taxes if you bring money into the country. So yes, you could do that, but are you safe from arbitrary intervention from the state? I don't think you are. I'm going to point out two examples. The last year, they tried to approve this regulation. There's regulation to support the firefighters in El Salvador, and it seemed like it was a pretty non-threatening piece of legislation to support the firefighters. But there, in one hidden article there, it said that in order to support the firefighters, they were going to establish a 5% contribution, or a 5% tax on every insurance policy in the country. Now, the government tries to sell itself as a pro government, as a pro business sort of administration. They say they're not going to impose new taxes, but that was a hidden tax. And they said that it's a new contribution to support the firefighters. A few minutes before the session in which they approved this legislation, they changed the rules and they removed the firefighters from this tax. So they said, you're going to charge 5% for every insurance policy, and it's going to go to the general fund of the country. So you effectively created a new tax. And then last year, the banking system, El Salvador is struggling financially, and they're trying to scramble for money. And what they're doing is they are issuing bonds in the local banking system, and they are short-term debt. And last year, in a surprising and mysterious move, the banking system of El Salvador, so effectively like private banks in El Salvador, unilaterally decided to give the government a longer term. Now, I believe that was not their decision. I believe there was some pressure by the government. And it just shows you that, yes, you can invest in El Salvador. Yes, if you can afford some things, you can buy them. But you are never safe from arbitrary intervention. And I believe that free markets require you to be safe from arbitrary intervention. And to quote, late David Boas, who did a lot for the ideas of freedom, if freedom can be summarized as don't hit people and don't take their stuff, in El Salvador, people are being, subject to state violence, and there have been numerous government officials who have taken stuff from the public funds, and they have been embraced by the government. So I believe El Salvador is far from being a place of the free.
Yeah, and I think that's why we need to talk about private property and property rights, the importance of free markets and rule of law. We definitely need more Ayn Rand in Latin America. Lawrence, do you want to?
Yes. Before we close out, we did get 2 super chats on YouTube, so I'd like to take a moment. Might go a few minutes over, but just to address the questions that are brought up in these 2 super chats. The first one comes from Fountainhead Forum. Thank you for the $5 super chat, and they're making the comment: in El Salvador last November, I saw a country that places high value on marriage and family. Contrast this to the sick divorce culture in the USA. They follow that up saying, you can't have free society without stable families. When parents get divorced, the state becomes the parent. So when we talk about here the Atlas Society, or just in general the liberty movement, about what culture or what ideas are important to keep and embrace a free society, what do you make of that comment? Is the family center important? should we focus more on individuals? What sort of thoughts do you have based on that comment?
I think that that we have done a very good job of saying that we care about family. I don't think that's true. I read a statistic this morning that only 30% of Salvadoran adults have been married in the last century. So this talking about traditional family and values, which sounds super close to the ultra right wing CPAC, MAGA things that Bukele is so close to right now, is distant from the reality. I don't know. Maybe El Salvador is a conservative society. It's a mainly Christian society where it's Catholic or evangelical, and for that reason, most of us were raised in an environment where this was placed in a high place of importance. It doesn't necessarily transform to the realities that you see throughout the country. There's also a lot of single parenting. There's also a lot of divorces. There's also it's maybe we'll talk about it more than we practice it.
Yeah, I also believe that if you watch old videos, I think Bukele's worst enemy is Bukele from the past. There was a video of him before he was president saying that the civil liberties fight of our generation is LGBTQI plus rights, which I agree with, and I side with that, with what he said back then. But if you hear Bukele talk about now, he just fired 300 people from the culture ministry, and the excuse he said, I believe it's a financial thing, but the excuse he said is that they were supporting agendas that were not compatible with the government. This is a few days after he censored or his culture ministry censored a play that talked about or addressed violence against LGBTQI plus people. So I believe that there's, just like Bitcoin, I believe that this whole family discourse in El Salvador is just a gimmick. It's just a publicity stunt. I believe Bukele will say whatever will help him float for the next few days or years. But I also want to ask, what sort of family-friendly government can you have if families are being torn apart by mass incarceration, by arbitrary arrests? There was a report this morning that said that there are like 500 over 3,000 minors arrested under the state of exception, a lot of them being arrested arbitrarily. So I don't believe you can talk about family when the state is abusing its powers like that.
Just a brief comment. I'm thinking about what Ayn Rand would have said about it. Definitely, like the government's job is not to impose a specific morality through the state. So just wanted to mention that.
Okay, go ahead, Ricardo.
Add that for decades, El Salvador has not seen separation of church and state. Religious leaders have had a lot of influence in what the state of El Salvador does, and I don't think we are. I mean, we are one of 5 countries in the world where there are no exceptions to ban abortions, including risk of life of the mother, incest, or like the baby's not going to actually be born, and that was not. When this was approved, it was approved because there was a lot of pressure by the religious right and by powerful right-wing groups aligned with the Catholic Church. So I don't believe that we have that, what you just said, Anto.
Okay, we're over time, but I want to thank everyone for joining us today. A super chat that came in that relates to the question I was going to ask next comes from Mark Thomas for a $5 super chat, asking how we can get in touch with Ricardo and Nelson. What's the best way to follow you two and to get in touch with any questions?
The place that used to be called Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same. Twitter. I've just shared in a private chat my handle, and I think Nelson has too. So yeah. Okay.
Perfect. And those have already been added into the chat on YouTube and Facebook as well. So I want to again thank everyone for joining us today for this interview. I hope those of you watching at home were able to get your questions answered. And if you liked what was talked about today, please consider giving a tax-deductible donation to the Atlas Society, helping us continue the work that we're doing. Be sure to join us next week. Our CEO, Jag, will be back, and she will be doing an interview with the economist Dr. Samuel Gregg about his book, The Next American Economy, Nation, State, and the Markets in an Uncertain World. Again, Ricardo, Nelson, Antonella, thank you for joining me today. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye.